In this video, we're going to look at some different perspectives for understanding and analyzing different global conflicts. When we're analyzing conflict to try and figure out exactly what's going on and to try and understand the root causes, there are three different levels of analysis we can consider: the individual level, the state level, and the system level. Each of those might give us insight into the nature and cause of the conflict. When we're talking about the individual level analysis, what you're focused on here is the leaders, the decision makers, the people that are instigating the war. So maybe the presidents or the prime ministers or the dictators of the countries that are involved in the conflict. We want to think about the incentives. Is perhaps a leader trying to start conflict to increase their popularity domestically? Do they have any constraints on their use of power? For example, in the United States, the president is the commander-in-chief, but they need Congress to authorize declarations of war? Or are they a dictator that has unlimited power to do whatever they want? All of those different factors, the incentives, all comprise the individual level analysis that can try and help us understand what's going on in a particular conflict. There's also the state level analysis. Here we are concerned with what happens in relations between states. Is there a boundary dispute? Are there treaties? What are the norms and expectations of behavior in the international community? Now, if there's two states at war, there could be a great history to their conflict. Maybe they've gone to war several different times throughout their history, and then the contemporary conflict is just a product of those. Maybe there's unresolved territorial disputes that are the subject of the conflict. It's also possible to have countries at war over resources to try and control trade routes or mineral deposits or waterways. And then, of course, we can have ideological conflict as well, where you could have democratic states going to war with authoritarian ones. All of these factors are part of a state-level analysis. Lastly, system level. What are the global factors and the broader context that might be giving rise to this conflict? Is it a system of great power competition where there's two great blocks that are in conflict with one another? Or is it more of a unipolar environment where one belligerent is trying to exert control over neighboring states? What role, if any, do international organizations play, such as the United Nations or NATO? Have they in any way sanctioned or endorsed the conflict? Those factors are all part of a global system-level analysis. For example, let's use the case study of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The Russian troops crossed the border to invade Ukraine. How can we understand this conflict? Well, we can apply all three levels of analysis to try and figure out what's going on. And each one might lend some insight. The individual level, the leader of Russia, Vladimir Putin, very much an autocrat, has very few constraints on power. And in fact, he's had a history of invading neighboring countries to try and exert power, but also to try and ferment his popularity at home. Anytime that there's an election coming, there seems to be a conflict that needed attention. And so from an individual level, we can understand how the Russian leader has a history of invading his neighbors. What about at the state level? Well, if we consider the history of Russia and Ukraine, they've been part of the Soviet Union, and for over 100 years, they've had disputes about borders and resources, and conflict between the two is very much part of their history. So it's no surprise to see some of those issues resurface. Lastly, at the system level, the global level, NATO is a multilateral organization that since the 1950s has been gradually creeping further east, and Russia considers this a threat. So perhaps NATO expansion is something that might be contributing to this conflict. All three of these factors can help us try and understand the different elements and the different aspects of this particular conflict. We can do those for anything. And to recap, different levels of analysis: what's the individual level? Who are the leaders involved and what incentives are they facing? State level, history, context, geography, and then of course the system, global level factors. What role do international organizations or international norms have? By considering all of these factors, can help us try and understand exactly what's going on in different global conflicts.